Last week on my drive back to Maine, I thought of you, your faces, and your spirit. And I couldn't wait to see you. Why? Because I wanted to share some really wonderful news with you. I wanted to tell you I was full to overflowing, and you had a big part in that. Last Sunday, when I peeked around the corner and saw the choir, the corners of my mouth just naturally moved upward. And when I walked in, their smiles made me smile even more. I spread my arms wide and I gave them a giant hug. And they told me that wasn't good enough. I needed to do it again. So I walked back out, came right back out again, and we did it all over again. I mean, where else can you go and get two giant hugs, if not Church on the Cape? As some of you may know, over the last several months, a string of painful events has laid my family, my extended family, very low. It began with my niece's diagnosis of breast cancer, and then my granddaughter's diagnosis of a 3-inch hole in her heart. 2 weeks later, my favorite aunt fell ill and was hospitalized. When I went to see her in the hospital, she told me she was really angry with God. And when I asked her why, she said, because I looked and I couldn't find my final breath. She found it 2 days later, and while I was there, I performed her service. Last fall, shortly after I got back home to Indiana, I asked to meet with my niece and nephew Jason to talk about their mother, my sister, who'd been suffering from severe depression and addiction to morphine. During our time together, Jason, my nephew, also shared about his 14-year-old adopted son, Jordan, who'd been having so many difficulties, and he said they were desperate to get him into a residential treatment center following years of abuse by his biological family. He said he'd called every single center in Indiana, but they were all full to capacity with kids who were in trouble, just like Jordan. And so he was put on a waiting list. A few days later, after everyone was asleep one night, Jordan went outside, got some gasoline, poured it on the steps, and set fire to the stairway where his fathers and 2 brothers were sleeping. When Jason awoke, he broke out a window, pushed his husband out, then dropped down the 11-month-old baby and then his 10-year-old son. When they were safe, he went into the bathroom, lay down because the window was too small and Jason was too big, and so he died. For 2 days, we dealt with all of the grief, the anger, and the sorrow. And we also had to deal with detectives because Jordan had stolen the car and was missing. The story for days was all over the news, morning, noon, and night. Some on social media were saying the reason Jordan had killed his father was because his parents were gay and they must have been molesting him. No one, of course, checked out to find out that Jason was on a foster care board because he and Alan were considered the best foster parents they'd ever had, and they had adopted 3 children that nobody wanted. Our pain, our family's pain, was crushing. All week long, we had to deal with not only those tremendous emotions, but also of Jason's death, the organ donation, Jordan's disappearance, the other 2 boys who were hospitalized and then brought out, a place for Alan and the kids to live, the fire, the insurance, and of course, the memorial service. I have to tell you, I became overwhelmed. I said to God, I absolutely cannot do Jason's service. I can't do it. And so I realized I didn't have the strength, the power, or the ability to be in a room so full of family pain and stand up and try to do a service. And so I laid down on the bed and I wept like a baby. And that's when I heard God call my name. And he reminded me what to do when I can't do anything. And that was simply to fall backwards into God's arms and trust him to help me. When Saturday came, they were all there, family and friends from all across the country, packing the funeral home. I knew what was coming, and I knew how deep the pain would be. Yet, I stepped into that waiting room of loved ones, walked over to the bier, took one last look at Jason, and then stepped to the podium. As I looked out, my sister quietly sobbing, my 3 daughters and grandchildren all weeping, I felt the mercy of Jesus looking at them through my eyes. As I quoted from the psalm, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," I felt the strength of heaven. When Alan, Jason's husband, collapsed and was carried out, I carried on because it was Jesus himself who held me up and kept me going. Last Sunday, after hugging the choir, I went into the Pastor Pat's office and she gave me a big hug. She asked me how I was doing. She'd written me several times, and she had prayed for me. I told her that I was full to overflowing with joy and gratitude, and I wanted to give a testimony, something I haven't done in a lot of years. "How about next Sunday?" she asked. The reason I am here today is to say thank you. Thank you for your love and your support through your cards, emails, and calls, but for much, much more than that. Thank you for praying for me and my family. It wasn't that you just muttered a few words to God on our behalf. You prayed with faith, believing. For when you prayed for me and for my family, you prayed believing God would change and transform us. You prayed believing that God was bigger than our sorrow and our suffering. You prayed believing that God's merciful light would enter into our darkest darkness. You prayed believing that God would turn our despair into hope. You prayed believing that God, by faith, would act on your prayers to lift us up, set us on our course, and bring us joy in Jesus. And I'm here today to say that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. And God filled me full to overflowing with joy and gratitude. Sometimes all we can see is the darkness, and God only knows how much darkness there is. We see the darkness, the bad stuff, the chaos, the fear, the pain, and all the suffering and things we don't like. And we can get so caught up in all of that darkness that we nearly draw up into a little ball. Our view becomes fogged, our spirits drag down, our confidence falls apart, our faith falters, and ironically, all we can speak is more darkness to ourselves and to those around us. And in the midst of it all, we can miss the very thing God wants us to see, and that is Jesus himself. Through your prayers, your love, and your faith, Jesus came to me and my family, and he changed us. When I talked with my sister a couple days ago, she told me the day before she got up and sewed all day, and she hadn't sewn in 2 years. She started to church, and she's finding hope. The doctors say that Gracie did so well in her heart surgery that it's like she never ever had a problem. Missy has recovered from radiation and a double mastectomy. Alan and the boys are doing fairly well. And Jordan, well, we're praying God will give him a miracle too. Thank you.